I was about to marry the man of my dreams. But 3 days before the big day, his parents gave me an ultimatum: sign a prenuptial agreement or the wedding would be canceled. What they didn't know was that behind my simple facade, I had $9 million, a successful business, and the courage to defy everything for the love I felt. I never imagined that this moment would reveal how much I could change the dynamics, not only of my life, but also of my relationship with the Blackwood family. My name is Sophia Williams, and at 28, I was just 3 days away from marrying the love of my life, Ethan Blackwood. Life seemed perfect until her extremely wealthy parents came to me with an ultimatum: sign the prenuptial agreement, or the wedding is off. What they never imagined was that behind my simple facade lay $9 million, a successful tech company, and an unwavering determination not to give in. Their arrogant faces were about to encounter the only thing they respected: money. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago, where my parents were teachers. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Every penny I paid for my college education was earned through scholarships I earned through late nights and perfect grades. I graduated with honors in computer science from Northwestern and soon after entered the tech world with a hunger for success on my own terms. My grandfather was always my biggest supporter. When he passed away during my senior year of college, he left me an astonishing inheritance. His simple life hid shrewd investments that, over the years, generated a $7 million fortune, which I began managing. I invested most of this inheritance and used a small portion to fund a startup focused on educational software. At 26, my company was valued at $2 million, bringing my total to $9 million. But no one suspected it. I lived in a simple apartment, drove a practical car, and dressed well but modestly. I wanted to be recognized for my competence, not the amount of money in my bank account. My wealth was private, known only to my parents, my best friend Jenna, and my financial advisors. It was at a charity event raising funds for educational programs for underprivileged children that I met Ethan. He was there because of the Blackwood family tradition, while I represented my company, which had made a significant software donation to the event. But I soon realized he wasn't like other members of high society. He was genuinely interested in the cause. Our conversation flowed easily, starting with educational inequality, moving on to favorite hiking trails, and our love of spicy Thai food. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation, even knowing his family background. Ethan was the son of Richard and Victoria Blackwood, one of Chicago's oldest and wealthiest families, with a lineage stretching back to the early lumber barons. The firm, Blackwood and Associates, dominated the legal industry, representing the largest companies in the Midwest. When I met his parents, I immediately noticed the first signs of conflict. The Blackwood mansion in Lake Forest was immense, with immaculate gardens and a house large enough to accommodate 8 entire families. Richard and Victoria were polite, but their discreet questions sought to probe my origins, my background, and, most importantly, my social class. Despite all this, I was in love with Ethan. He genuinely cared about me, regardless of what I had or didn't have. When he proposed on a sunset cruise on Lake Michigan, I said yes, without hesitation. The ring was his grandmother's, a discreet emerald that looked perfect on my finger. Wedding planning was like a dream, but soon I began to notice the cracks in the foundation. Victoria wanted to weigh in on every detail, from the venue to the flowers, and while she never directly mentioned money, she implied that since I couldn't afford a wedding worthy of her son, it would be their responsibility to pay for everything. I proudly let this slide, because what mattered to me was that, in the end, I would be married to Ethan. He tried to mediate, but I mostly gave in, as the petty arguments seemed irrelevant compared to the joy of marrying him. With just 3 days to go until the wedding, everything was almost ready. The venue, the flowers, the catering, everything was taken care of. I was finalizing the final details with the photographer when I received a call from Victoria, asking me to come to their mansion for afternoon tea. Ethan had been in meetings all day, she said, and thought it would be good for us to have some time alone before the final preparations. At that moment, I didn't know I was walking into a trap that would jeopardize not only my relationship with Ethan, but also my very integrity. The mansion was more imposing than ever on that clear Wednesday day. Upon arriving, I noticed that Richard was also there, which was unexpected. Marta, the housekeeper, led me to the living room. Victoria and Richard were there, sitting as if in a business meeting. They were calm and impeccable looking, but something in the atmosphere told me I was about to face something life-changing. I should have known something was wrong when Victoria invited me to tea. Blackwood Manor was never a place where I felt completely at home, but I was intent on finding a way to connect with Ethan. When I arrived, the first thing that caught my eye was Richard's car parked in the driveway, which was a bit unexpected. Normally, he was in his office, but this time it seemed he was waiting for me. Marta, ever polite, led me into the living room, where I found Richard and Victoria seated with a formality that immediately made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't the typical, relaxed tea I'd imagined. They were there, in fact, to discuss something important. Something that, it seemed, had been planned well in advance. Victoria looked at me with a smile that seemed polite, but was really just a disguise. She invited me to sit, and for a moment, I almost thought she was trying to be pleasant, something she'd never been before. "Sophia, dear, thank you so much for coming. Do you think you're ready for our chat?" she said, the words sweet, but with an intention I could barely identify. The mood was heavy. Richard, who usually maintained a measured silence, now wore a serious, almost impersonal expression. He removed a leather portfolio from his desk and slid it in front of me. When I looked at its contents, my stomach tightened. It was a prenuptial agreement, and I knew, even before I touched it, that this was no mere formality. It was an attempt to control everything I represented, regardless of what I had built over the years. "This is the agreement we expect you to sign before the wedding," Richard said with impressive coolness. "We have a tradition of protecting family assets, and we'd like to ensure the Blackwood estate remains intact should things not work out between you and Ethan." The moment felt surreal. The words felt like a slap in the face. How could someone who felt valued and loved by Ethan be so disrespected? For a brief moment, I almost considered giving in. After all, I was about to marry the man I loved. But then something inside me stirred, and Victoria's voice, usually polite but full of disdain, made me realize the magnitude of the situation. "Of course, you're in a privileged position, but what we're asking is something everyone who joins our family must do. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you. Ethan knows this is necessary. It's not about love, it's about protection." I took a deep breath, trying to gather as much calm as possible. I looked at the contract and immediately realized it was extremely one-sided. The clause on property division was so disproportionate that I was shocked. Not only would I be entitled to nothing in the event of a divorce, but even my own company, the educational software company I founded and which brought me to this point, would be considered part of the marital assets. My heart raced. What was happening here wasn't just a power play, but an attempt to undermine everything I'd built. I looked at the contract again, knowing that if I signed it, I'd be giving up my independence. My identity. "I can't sign this," I said, my voice firm. "This contract doesn't reflect the reality of who I am or what I expect from a relationship with Ethan. I can't sign something that puts me at a disadvantage, as if my story and my struggle mean nothing."
Victoria smiled sarcastically.
"So, you're saying your son's marriage to a woman like you is conditioned on a piece of paper? If you truly love Ethan, you should understand the need to protect his family." Richard, who had been watching silently until then, leaned forward, his tone now more aggressive. "Sophia, you're confusing things. Blackwood has a legacy that needs to be preserved. If that means making some tough demands, then that's what we'll have to do." Richard's words cut through the air. I couldn't decide if I was more angry at the content of the contract or their condescension. Ethan was the man I loved, but at that moment, it felt like he was more tied to his family's expectations than to what he truly believed was right. "I won't do that. I love Ethan and want to marry him, but I'm not a commodity you can trade. And if he truly loves me, he'll understand that." My voice wavered, but I kept my gaze steady. Victoria was silent for a moment. She clearly hadn't expected any resistance. But it was Richard who said, without hesitation, "If you don't sign, then the wedding is off. There's no discussion." That ultimatum was the ultimate test. They wanted to break me, they wanted to make me give in. And for a moment, it felt like I was losing everything. But something inside me, something I didn't even know I had, made me feel like I couldn't let myself be broken. I couldn't let them treat me this way. I stood up, grabbing the contract, and putting it in my bag. I'll discuss this with Ethan. He's the only person I really need to talk to about this.
Not you.
They stared at me silently as I turned to leave. I didn't know what was going to happen, but one thing was clear. The real fight was just beginning. As I left Blackwood Manor, I felt the weight of frustration on my shoulders, as if all the tension from that encounter was crushing me. Richard and Victoria's words still echoed in my mind as the drive home seemed endless. Every stoplight I passed, every turn I took, made me question if I was doing the right thing. I was about to risk everything, my relationship with Ethan, the idea of a life with him, because of a piece of paper they were trying to force me to sign. The wedding of my dreams could be destroyed, all because of an ultimatum. I needed time to think. I knew there was more to Ethan and his parents' story, something he'd never told me. The pressure he felt to please his family was immense, but did that justify what they'd done to me? Did he care enough about what his parents thought to allow this to happen? My cell phone rang repeatedly while I was driving, but I ignored every call. I knew it was Ethan. I knew he was trying to reach me, worried, but I couldn't reach him right then. I needed to process what had happened. I needed to understand what was really going on inside me and within our relationship. When I got home, I felt a pain in my chest that felt like it was crushing my heart. It wasn't just the pain of the clash with the Blackwoods. It was also the pain of feeling alone, of being torn between the man I loved and the values I defended. What would I do now? Would I sign the contract to save the marriage? Or would I stand up, show who I was and what I'd built, and risk losing everything for a principle? And Ethan, what would he think? After a while, I decided to call Jenna. She'd always known what was going on with me, and even though she was miles away, she always had the right words at the right time. "Jenna," she said, her voice shaking, "they gave me an ultimatum. If I don't sign the contract today, the marriage is off." The pause on the other end of the line was long, and I knew she was absorbing the gravity of the situation. "Sophia," she began, her voice firm, "this is manipulation. They're not doing this because they care about Ethan. They're doing this because they think they can control you, control everything. And if you give in now, you'll be allowing them to do this to you forever." I knew Jenna was right, but at the same time, I also knew that the story we were living wasn't just mine. It was ours. Ethan and I had built a genuine connection, something that couldn't be destroyed by a contract, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. "I need to talk to Ethan," I said finally, deciding I needed to understand his position. I couldn't make a decision without knowing where he stood, without knowing if he was truly willing to fight for us. I need to know if he sees me as a partner, or if I'm just someone he'd marry to please his family. "It'll be okay," Jenna replied, more confident than I felt. "You're a strong woman, Sophia. And no matter what happens, you have what it takes to fight for what you deserve." After hanging up, I took a deep breath. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. I'd been too careful to keep my financial situation a secret, perhaps fearing that people would see my wealth as a threat. But now, with everything at stake, the truth needed to come out. Not just about my wealth, but about who I was and what I represented. I picked up my phone and texted Ethan. "We need to talk. Meet me at 7 o'clock at Carlucci's. Just the two of us." The response was almost immediate. "I'll be there, Sophia. I love you." Those words melted me every time he said them. But they also made me wonder, did he love me enough to stand up for me? Or was he so lost in his family's expectations that he couldn't stand by me when I needed him most? I knew that meeting would be crucial. It was there that I would discover not only if Ethan truly loved me, but also if he was willing to fight for a relationship based on equality. The conversation I needed to have with him wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't just be about a prenuptial agreement. It was about us, about how our love and mutual respect would be tested by external pressures. At 7 a.m., there I was, at the entrance to Carlucci's, waiting. The place was familiar to us. It was where we'd celebrated our first date, where conversations flowed as if the outside world didn't exist. But that night, what I wanted most was to know where Ethan really was. And I knew that conversation would define what came next. He arrived punctually as always, with that nervous smile on his face. When he saw me, his eyes showed relief, but they quickly turned to concern when he realized how serious I was. "I don't know what to say, Sophia," Ethan began, his voice thick with regret. "I know I shouldn't have let it get this far. I should have talked to you sooner. I didn't know how to do this without hurting you." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Ethan, what's going on? Did you know about the contract? Did you know your family would force me to sign a document that essentially grounds me?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. I knew they wanted something like this, but I didn't think it would be so drastic." "So you knew, but you didn't tell me?" I said, my voice shaking. "You knew, and you let me be humiliated by them. I thought you were different." "I love you," he said sincerely, but his voice was still filled with uncertainty. "I was trying to protect you, but I got lost in all of this. You're right. I should have been there for you. But tell me what you want to do now. Tell me you're willing to fight for us." I stared at him for a long moment. That was all I wanted to know, if he was willing to fight. Not just for himself, but for us. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating. I stared at Ethan, hoping to see more of the man I knew, more of the man I loved. He seemed lost, as if trying to understand what was happening inside me and, at the same time, searching for a way to convince me that all this would pass. But in that moment, he wasn't just apologizing. He was asking me to choose. "I don't want you to do this for me, Ethan," I finally said, my voice calm but resolute. "I need to know if you see me as a partner, someone who will walk beside you through everything. Because if you truly love me, you'll be there for me through this. Not because I have money, but because I'm the woman you chose to marry." He looked down, clearly shaken. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Sophia. I knew my parents would be difficult, but I never imagined it would come to this. I know I hurt you, but I want you to know that." "Ethan," I interrupted, taking his hand in mine. "I love you too. And that's why I'm telling you I can't just sign this contract. I'm not someone you have to protect or hide behind. I don't want to be seen as charity or someone who will depend on you and your family. I want to be treated as your equal." He fell silent, his gaze now more serious. "I know I was wrong, and I want to make it right. I should have spoken to you sooner. I should have stood up for you. I let my family dictate what I should do, and that was wrong. But I'm here now, Sophia, and I will fight for you, for us." I could see the sincerity in his eyes. Something inside me relaxed, but there was still a small doubt. He was ready to act, but to what extent could he truly defy his family? I didn't want any more empty promises. I wanted action. "So, what do we do now?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked at me with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "I'll talk to my parents. I'll tell them this is no longer an option. I chose you, and our life will be built together as equals. I will face the consequences of that. If they want to cut ties with me because of this, then so be it." Those words gave me a sense of relief, but also fear. We knew the battle wouldn't be easy, and not just because of the promise of the contract. It was much deeper than that. It was about how his family, especially his mother, had always seen him as a piece of their inheritance, a valuable asset, and not as a man with his own choices. But I believed in us. "And when you go talk to them, I want you to take me with you," I said, already imagining the impact of this decision. "I'm not going to be invisible in our story anymore. This isn't just about the contract, Ethan. It's about our life together." He nodded, almost wordlessly, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what we were about to face. At that moment, I felt the real battle was just beginning. What would happen if the Blackwoods didn't accept our union as equal? And what would it mean for Ethan and me, for our future, if he were cornered by his loyalty to his family? I didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. I could no longer let anyone dictate the rules for me. We decided we would face everything together. But before we went to the Blackwoods' house, I knew we had to be a team, a unit, and that this would be the moment to show not only his family, but everyone around us, that our relationship would be built on trust and mutual respect, and that nothing less would be accepted. The sun was already beginning to set when Ethan and I arrived at the Blackwood mansion. I could feel his nervousness in the air, as if he were preparing for a major confrontation. Deep down, I knew that for him, this visit wouldn't just be a confrontation with his parents, but a confrontation with himself, with the expectations he'd carried for years. As we entered, the mansion's grandeur seemed even more imposing. The gleaming marble floor, the immense staircase, and the walls adorned with expensive paintings and tapestries made the house feel more like a museum than a residence. But at the same time, I didn't care. The ostentation that had once impressed me now seemed empty, like a facade hiding the true intentions of the people who lived there. Richard and Victoria sat in the great hall, as always, with their impeccable posture and that air of superiority that seemed to accompany every movement. They greeted us with looks that now seemed more inquisitive than welcoming. Ethan took a step forward, and before he could speak, I cut him off, looking at them both sternly. "I didn't come here to submit to your rules, Victoria." "Richard," I began, my voice controlled but full of conviction. "I'm here because I'm the woman your son chose to marry. And that's not just about a contract, but about the respect you owe me, my story, and what I've built." Victoria was silent for a moment, no doubt surprised by my stance. Richard, on the other hand, frowned but said nothing. They were so used to being in control that the idea of being challenged seemed to shock them. "Ethan has already spoken to you about what happened, and I hope he was clear," I continued, turning my attention back to him. "He's already made it clear that our life together will be built on respect and equality. I will not be treated as a mere accessory in his life." Ethan looked at his parents, finally standing up as the man I knew him to be. "What Sophia is saying is true. I chose her, and any conditions surrounding our union need to be reviewed. Whatever you did or said before no longer applies." The air in the room was tense. Victoria looked at Richard, as if expecting him to resolve the situation. But this time, Richard was silent, as if weighing his options. The fact that Ethan had taken such a stance was already unusual, something that hadn't happened in years. "Ethan, dear," Victoria said, her voice cold, but with an undertone of manipulation. "You know we're just trying to protect our family and make sure you're not influenced by outside interests. You understand that, don't you?" "I'm not being influenced by anyone," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "I'm an adult. I understand the gravity of the situation and the responsibility I carry, but I'm not going to let anyone decide who I marry or what my wife's worth." I saw a small shift in Victoria's face. Maybe it was frustration, maybe something more, but she knew she couldn't manipulate Ethan like she used to. The conversation continued for a while, with Richard and Victoria trying to get Ethan to relent, but he was determined. He spoke with a clarity and confidence I'd never seen in him before. And I felt that, in that moment, he wasn't just fighting for us, but also breaking free from the invisible chains of his family. Then, finally, Richard spoke. "Let's review what you're proposing, Ethan. We're not ready to accept all of this right away, but we can consider your conditions." I knew this wasn't a complete victory, but it was a huge step. They were beginning to see Ethan differently. He wasn't just their controlled son anymore. He was a man with his own choices. And most importantly for me, he saw me as a partner. He was by my side, ready to face anything. Those moments at Blackwood Manor marked a turning point in our lives. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult. His relationship with his parents wouldn't change overnight, and there would still be challenges. But as I left, I felt something had shifted between Ethan and me. For the first time, he was truly taking a stand, without giving in to family pressure. And I had taken a stand, too. The truth about myself, my independence, my success, and my place by his side were now on the table. And it would make us stronger. No matter what others thought or expected of us, what mattered now was our relationship. 2 days later, the wedding took place, and all I felt was the certainty that together, Ethan and I were stronger. The omen that threatened us was now locked away in a safe, and with it, all the insecurities we'd carried before. there was no more doubt. As I walked into the church with my family and friends around me and Ethan by my side, something told me that, even with all the adversities we faced, this would be the beginning of a life built on respect and partnership. Now that our story has been told, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up and fight for what's yours? Share in the comments. And if this story of overcoming and trusting in love inspired you, like it, share it with anyone you think needs to hear this message, and subscribe to follow more stories of transformation. Remember, the greatest power you have is being true to yourself.